and welcome to a new episode on the podcast Cuppa with Vidula. Before we dive into this episode, I just wanted to introduce you to the podcast's very first sponsor, Executive Alice. We all know that running a business takes time and effort, from responding to email to scheduling posts, creating content, researching hashtags, and everything in between. What if you had someone doing it for you? This is exactly what Executive Alice is offering. Free up your calendar and let Steph handle it all for you while you spend your time with your family or doing what you do best. You can do it all with Executive Alice, guiding you every step of the way so that you can shine and do what you are good at. You can get in contact with Steph through her Instagram page at Executive Alice. The link is in the show notes, and you can discuss directly with her how she can best help you. Thank you, Executive Alice, for sponsoring today's episode. If you want to be a sponsor on the podcast, feel free to reach out to me either on my socials at Cuppa with Vidula on Facebook and Instagram, or you can email me info@Trisquel, so info at Trisquel, TRISKWELL.com, and let's get working together so that you can achieve your business goal this year and you can help support the podcast. Welcome to Cuppa with Vidula. I'm your host, Alicia. I'm an exercise physiologist by trade. I'm also a doula and I'm a mum to two. I created this podcast over a year ago now to allow mums to have a platform to safely share their birth and parenting journey, regardless of where they birth, whether it's a hospital birth, it's a planned C-section, whether they birthed at home, and whether they had a midwife present or not. It's all on Cuppa with Vidula. And every month, I also chat with an expert in the field of pregnancy, birth, and parenting, in the aim to be able to share expert knowledge and raise awareness about important topics. So if you've been enjoying the podcast, please consider subscribing either on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your podcast from. I'm also on YouTube as well, so you can watch the interviews if you'd like. And if you wouldn't mind, please leave a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. It really helps the algorithm to find me, to then share what I do so that more mums, more parents to be can find me. So with this in mind, I'll leave you with the episode now. If you want to share your story, head over to the show notes. There's a link there and you can fill out the form and I'll get in touch with you to record your incredible birth and parenting journey. So in today's episode, I am chatting with Janelle from the Wild Orange Tree. Janelle is a women's health occupational therapist, which I have to admit, before we got in touch with each other, I actually didn't know that there was such a thing as a women's health OT. So I learned a lot in this episode, actually. It is an incredible episode where Janelle really shows us that there needs to be a really holistic approach to pregnancy, to birth, and to postpartum. It's not just about, oh, well, you've had a healthy baby, you're healthy, great. There's a lot more to it, and things can linger on for years sometimes, and some mums just wander around knowing that something's not right without being able to name what isn't right. And this is something we explore in this episode, this idea that postpartum is a lot more complex than we actually understand it. It's also important to acknowledge that problems can arise at any point, or they can be lingering for any number of months or years. You need to have a holistic approach. You need to look into everything from a physical perspective, an emotional perspective, a spiritual perspective. It's all interconnected. So I really hope you enjoyed this episode. It is such a great one. I've really enjoyed recording this and chatting with Janelle, and we could have spoken for another hour or two easily. So I'll leave you to it now, and I really hope you enjoy it. Hi, Janelle. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here and have this conversation with you.
Perfect. Do you want to start by introducing yourself? So telling the listeners your name,
Yeah.
what you do as a profession, and where you are based.
Yeah, of course. So I'm Janelle-Women. My business is the Wild Orange Tree, and I am an occupational therapist working in this area of women's and maternal health. And this is something that we connected over because it was like,
Mm-hmm.
what? Occupational therapy? You're showing up in this space? Haven't heard of this before. So let's start there. Some people might have come across occupational therapists,
Mm-hmm.
but often it's if grandma's had a fall, or maybe a
Yep.
child that's had a developmental challenge, or all these other changes. But at its core, occupational therapists help people do the everyday things that they're needing and wanting to
Mm-hmm.
do. We help people build meaningful and purposeful lives when a
Mm-hmm.
challenge, an illness, a transition, an injury, whatever it might be, comes along and creates some disruption to life
Mm-hmm.
as we know it. And for mums, there can be so many disruptions, just that mother
Yes.
transition itself. Some of the recent research about the role of occupational therapists working with mothers talks about these changes being subtle but complex. There is
Mm-hmm.
so much that sits in that mothering transition. But we can also have specific changes to our mental health,
Mm-hmm.
maybe to our pelvic health, maybe to
Mm-hmm.
our menstrual cycles, and we find ourselves with baby in arms on the other side of birth. And we also work with people that don't end up with the baby in arms on the other side of
Mm-hmm.
birth as well, to plant that seed. But we arrive in this place perhaps with this image of what we thought it would be like to
Mm-hmm.
mother, and we maybe have a lot of pain when we try and get on the floor to play with our baby, or we're trying to be intimate with a partner, or we just feel so overwhelmed we can't work out how to get out to playgroup and pack all the things that our baby needs. Or maybe
Mm-hmm.
we're feeling really depressed and we know that something's not sitting right after that birth experience that we had. Or maybe our menstrual cycles show up really differently and we've got a lot of pain or lots of bleeding or
Yeah.
clotting or things that we didn't experience before. And occupational therapists are working in these spaces to help mums navigate these things, work out what kind of solutions are going to help them show up as the mum that they're needing and wanting to be.
Amazing. Wow. And you've covered a lot of topics, obviously, because
Yes.
as you said, you work specifically with mums to be and then mums,
Mm.
which also include, as you mentioned, those who don't end up with a baby in their arms, actually.
Yeah.
But it's and that's, I guess, that's giving us a picture of how broad
Yes.
motherhood is. It's not just,
Enormously
oh, I
so.
have a baby, I breastfeed,
Mm.
or I'm
Yeah.
now returning to work. There is a lot more to motherhood than just the
Yes.
baby or the toddler or the
Yes.
kids. There is
Yes.
yourself, your identity, how
Yes.
you fit in this family, in this relationship of yours,
Mm.
how you are feeling mentally, physically, emotionally. There's a
Yes.
lot. And as you said, motherhood, even pregnancy, there's a big transition there where I think we think we know what we're in for, or we
Mm.
we like to imagine, like, oh, this is what I'm going to feel in my pregnancy,
Yeah.
this is how it's going to go. Usually it's not the case
Yes.
for some reason.
Yep.
And then motherhood is the biggest, almost
Mm.
disbelief of it all, where you go,
Yes.
oh, it will be good, I will be on maternity leave, I'll be able to do this and really look after myself. And you have
Yeah.
no time for yourself in the early
Yes.
postpartum, we're talking.
Yeah.
And even then, it seems to just fly by, and
Mm.
usually mums put themselves last
Mm.
and put the kids, the partner, the
Yes.
relationship, the family, the work
Yeah.
first. Yeah,
Yeah.
wow.
We got to place mama central to that. And
Exactly.
I know women's health occupational therapists or maternal health occupational therapists, who might go by various names, we all have different skill sets and different
Yep.
things that we're bringing. So some might focus on mental health, some might focus on ergonomics of how you set up your home environment,
Mm-hmm.
or wrist injuries, or maybe
Mm-hmm.
people exploring some of those challenges around domestic violence. We can
Mm-hmm.
look at return to work and some of
Yep.
those challenges with new routines and
Mm-hmm.
habits and roles and so forth. So just to put it out there that when you encounter a women's health occupational therapist, we're all going to be doing slightly different things
Yep.
based on the unique skills that we bring challenging. But one thing that I'm really passionate about in this space is that when we are supporting a mother with her pelvic health or with her mental health or her menstrual cycles or whatever else is going on, we actually need a different kind of support to what we need when we encounter those challenges outside of the mother transition. Because mothering is rite of passage. It is blood rite of passage. That's a completely different lens to put on this experience. We have all the brain changes that happen with pregnancy and postpartum. We have these physical, biological changes and these underlying biological needs that we carry with us. And we really need to work out how do we honour that experience as this enormous rite of passage transition, as well as supporting those particular challenges that can come along the way.
So I guess the first place where I'd like to start is, how does a mum or a mum-to-be get access to your services? How do you get, and I mean, not necessarily just yours, but a women's health OT in general, how do you get access to that service?
So there's not a lot of these roles in like hospital settings or maternity programs or things like that. There's a few little examples around the country, but most of us are in private practice. So might be connecting, just asking questions. Do you know of a women's health OT? On the Occupational Therapy Australia Facebook page, there is a search there for find an OT. At the moment, it's a little bit tricky to use that to hone down to women's health or maternal health specifically, but we're working on that in the background. So that's one way to find us. But once you've actually found a practitioner, maybe they work locally. I do a lot of online work as well. Actually, I didn't talk about where I was based. We can come back to that later. Once you've found someone, you can just choose to do private pay if that's something that you would like to do and is in your capacity. If you've got extras on your private health insurance, sometimes you'll have coverage for occupational therapy and you might be able to do a rebate through that. Often it is the higher levels of cover, but sometimes mums might take out that higher level of cover to support themselves through that pregnancy journey. So always worth checking if you do have private health insurance. Or you can also speak to your GP about getting a Medicare referral. So there's two different types of plans that sometimes we call them a shared care plan. It's also got this horrible name, the chronic diseases care plan, which just sounds yuck. But it's really, you've had something going on for at least 6 months. That's the chronic bit. And you can get up to 5 sessions to see any allied health professional, and that can include occupational therapy. So the rebate's not huge, it's just over $50, but that can sometimes be a really useful help to be able to access some support. And there are also some women's health occupational therapists who have mental health endorsement. So people like myself who can also provide under a mental health care plan. So you can always check in with the OT. Actually, for people who don't know, OT is the abbreviation for occupational therapist. So I think good to formally put that out there, as we often just say OT and maybe people don't realise what that is. So check with your OT if they are mental health endorsed. If you go to your GP, you may need to give them a little bit of education going, no, it can't just be a psychologist. There's actually mental health social workers and mental health occupational therapists who can also deliver services under those care plans. But that can give you up to the 10 sessions per calendar year, and the rebate is a bit higher for that. So a number of options there for people to consider if they're curious about this type of support or feel that it really resonates for where they're at.
Yeah, and see, it's good that there is also, we know that the cost of accessing those services can be the biggest barrier to women getting there. If it's anything to do with their children, the cost will make it work. When it's for themselves, all of a sudden that cost is, no, I can't do it, I can't justify it. So it's good to know that you can get it through Medicare and you get a rebate of sorts, which is sometimes that can be the difference between doing it and not doing it. So that's amazing. That's good. Thanks for that. I didn't know about all those options actually.
Yeah, no, there's quite a few there.
Yeah, no, that's right. So I guess let's dive into your specific work. So what I guess the clients you see, what do they come to you for? What problems are they encountering in their life?
So the work that I do, it's heavily driven by my own personal experience of becoming a mum and some of the challenges that I had, first of all, with my pelvic health, whereas a very physical, muscle-based approach to what was happening in my body, it wasn't helping me get better. In fact, it was making me worse. And so I ended up going on this deep journey myself, really exploring how much our birth and our mothering and even stories from before that live in our bodies, and how our physical well-being is so attached to our emotional well-being. And similarly, our emotional well-being then turns around and starts playing out in our physical health as well. I also do a lot of work with menstrual cycles, how those birth and mothering experiences actually imprint into our menstrual cycle. And that's a mechanism for us to be able to explore what's going on and offer ourselves what we needed during those mothering experiences. So a lot of people who I see might be people that have tried to get support for physical challenges, but maybe they also feel like that's not making a difference, a physical approach, or perhaps they feel really emotional when they're having that pelvic health assessment. Maybe they get really teary and they don't really understand what's going on in their body, but yet perhaps they've tried talking to someone and it's all in their head. They need to come into their body and really join all these dots about what's actually going on and come at the challenges that they're experiencing from a very embodied perspective. So probably the biggest theme in the work that I do is helping people get out of their head and come home to their body and find what they need to be able to sit safely in their body and be present with their body and access the wisdom and the knowledge that intuitively sits within us, and actually use that body wisdom as a guide for what we're needing to work through these challenges and integrate them into our mothering experience. So it's a very embodied approach that I use. Like sometimes it is talk-based, but we usually end up bringing visualization and strategies to connect in with the body as part of that. I also do a lot of touch-based practices. There's a number of different bodywork modalities that I've trained in. So things like holistic pelvic care, mind abdominal therapy, and I'm certified with the Institute of Birth Healing around pregnancy preparation and birth recovery techniques. And all of that is this really embodied way of working with the body and tuning in to the body so that we can be present with that space and let it reveal the answers to us.
That's interesting, because sometimes, like, something's not right, but you don't know what it is, right? And you go, I'm not really sure, but I just feel like, something in there's just not, it's not working. And you don't know if it's, obviously you can have physical manifestation of, mental health, side like problems really. So then it's a chicken and egg problem. Which one came first, right? And which one is actually the root cause that you can really work on to try and help the other manifestation, basically. So that's a very tricky job. And again, coming back to the whole, motherhood being so involved, there is so many layers to it, so many aspects to being a mom, beyond just, being a stay-at-home mom, caring for your child, cooking dinner, cleaning the house. There's so much more than that. And we're starting to talk about the mental load. And I love this term because it really helps to shift the perspective to, moms are just, they're just responsible for, driving the kids to school, picking them up, so on, so on, to going, okay, there is actually a lot more. Like, I don't like to say responsibilities because, well, we know we've got responsibilities, but it just goes to show I guess, all the load that we take on as moms that is not visible to, potentially the partner, the family, the grandparents, so on. And they just don't realize that you've got, all that on your plate, all of that while working a job and also looking after yourself, having hobbies, maybe going out socializing, all of those aspects we have to life.
Yeah, enormously so. And I love that term, the mental load, as well. But I actually think it's even more than that. It's also the emotional load. Because when we talk about the mental load, like if our partner did the shopping and they picked this up and they did a few more dishes, like it's so much more than that. And I think capturing the emotional and the mental aspect of what we carry deepens the weight of what that can be. And like there's so many broader systems and structures and things that really reinforce mothers having to take these things on, and it's like the greater patriarchal society benefits from mothers being these self-sacrificial lambs, don't they? There's this whole other conversation that we could be having there. But I think another really big thing that you touched on at the start of that is we don't always know what is going on. And because we're still entering this new paradigm of seeing this mother transition through this bigger lens, maybe you want to call it a feminine lens, whatever it is that resonates, we often don't know what's happening there. And I think so many mums end up feeling really broken by that experience, like even gaslit to sorts. Like they'll go, hey, my C-section scar just feels wrong. And they'll go, oh, it looks okay. Well, who gives a fig what it looks like if it's not feeling good? Or it might be, oh, you've got all these supports around and like you're managing to get all of the mothers groups and your baby's developed, like what's wrong with your mental health, but doesn't feel right. And I think it's so powerful when we can create these spaces for mums where we can listen to that and really hear their story and be curious, why is it that it doesn't feel right when everyone else is saying it should? It's that subtle but complex nature of the mother transition. And I've just got such a heart for mums that feel broken by the support that they receive that is meant to be helping them, that actually makes them feel more broken and confused and thinking that there's something wrong with them, when really so much of that pathology needs to sit with these environments that we're forced to birth and mother in. And helping to give that bigger context can be really powerful for a mum to bring compassion into what her experience is and work out what she would like to do with that scenario that she's finding herself in.
Yeah, and something you touched on that's so interesting that I love talking about is, this perception that as moms, so we obviously compare ourselves to other moms. That's what we do. Is it the best thing to do? Probably not. And it's this perception that everyone else is doing it better than me. Everyone else has got it. I haven't got it. My kids are still in pajamas at like 2 p.m. and I see, on Instagram, you see those other moms and, kids are all dressed up and they're out the door by 8 and, they're on time to appointments and so on. And sometimes it can be so hard, the social media.
There's a lot to answer for, doesn't it?
Yes, because it's just a snapshot in time, right? It's just one photo of something usually going right. It's usually not the meltdown. It's not the 3 a.m. feed. It's not, it's not that.
It's not the 2 minutes before the photo or the hour and a half after the photo, hey?
Exactly. And I think it's important to create a space for mums to just be able to not be okay or say, I feel like a failure, or I feel like I'm not doing enough, or I feel like I'm, and just express how you feel. Because sometimes when you say that at mum's group or your friends or your family, they go, oh no, you're doing a great job. Stop it. It's so good. And you're like, that's not what I need. I don't need you to say, oh, no, you're doing amazing. I need you to just hear me and say, I feel like this, because, or, that's how I feel. And then for you to not try and fix this, I just need to let the feelings out, because otherwise you're bottling them up and they're never coming out. And that's just not good.
Yeah. No, hugely so. And like social media, I think, has brought so many blessings to mums, and that we've been able to access information and find out about different things that we wouldn't have been able to. But there's also this real flip side where like we need to keep reminding ourselves, and I love the work that Dr. Sophie Brock is doing in this space around this culture of motherhood. And effectively it's this game that we are conditioned into that is built around this cycle of guilt and shame and not being enough, but never being able to be enough by this arbitrary measure that is put out there. And how do we create these spaces where how am I getting off that really horrible hamster wheel, because it's not helping me, it's not helping my children. In the bigger sense, it's not helping our communities either. We've got to recognize that it is this game that we're trying to be played into, and having these spaces where it's like, no, we're actually getting off that and we're creating this new paradigm of what we want it to look like to show up as a mum. It's such an important conversation that we're starting to have, and I really hope that we start seeing shifts in generations to come around that. But I think another thing, when I was doing some training looking at what happens hormonally and so forth with mums, I had a really big aha moment when I learnt that when we lack oxytocin as mums, so that's the hormone of love, that hormone that comes from breastfeeding and after a physiological birth, and that we're meant to have people around us heaping the oxytocin on us. In the absence of oxytocin, we end up with competitiveness, because we step into this self-preservation of it's this protective response that comes out, and so much about the way that we are forced to mother, like being alone and feeling like we're never good enough and not being able to access the supports because we don't have the finances to do that. But we end up with mums that are so low in oxytocin, and it's just like, well, that's the mummy wars explained by hormones, isn't it? So again, we can bring compassion into that. How can we help in whatever circumstance that mum is in? How can we help bring the oxytocin? How can we help bring the celebration? How can we help bring the honouring, so that she can feel more grounded in her body, in her mothering experience, to be able to build this experience of mothering that actually serves her as the person she is growing into as this mother, but is also Well, 4 to 10 years postpartum is the most likely point when depletion is going to hit a mum. I love how we're talking more about this postnatal depletion. But again, some of those mental health challenges, they can really peak in those later years as well. And again, it comes back to this cultural ideology that we have is postpartum is 6 weeks and you get your check to say you're fine for sex and exercise, and off you go, and what's wrong with you? And like with my business being the Wild Orange Tree, there's a number of meanings that sit behind it, but one of them is that when you plant an orange tree, it takes at least 3 years for that tree to fruit, and that is dependent on it being watered and nurtured and getting sunlight and all those sorts of things that plants need. And traditionally, postpartum was thought to be at least 3 years. And when we lived in those tribal communities, again, we need to be careful we don't completely idolize those ways either, but there was this notion that a mother needed additional physical, emotional, cognitive, spiritual support for that 3-year time period as she developed and matured and recovered and grew into that new identity and self and person that she was after that rite of passage. And so many of these challenges that can show up for us many years later on, they point back to the fact that we don't know as a culture how to nourish mothers in those early weeks, months, years when it really, really matters. And mums are paying the price. Like that traditional saying, the 40 days for 40 months, that comes from the Chinese and some of those Ayurvedic traditions around postpartum care. This investment in the early days, it makes a difference for lifetime, and it's a really big explanation for why some of these things show up much later on. We go through survival mode and eventually the bundle drops, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And we know that our Western culture is not supporting moms in pregnancy. I mean, you have some support, but if you have a low risk, uncomplicated pregnancy, you can just almost fall through the cracks and just not really see anyone until it's pretty much, D-Day, basically. And so the postpartum is horrible for that, because you just get no support, or you just don't know what's available. Sometimes it's not easy to find what's available, and also to know what you need. Because if you go to your GP and you say, "Oh, I'm not feeling right," they want symptoms. They want something. They want you to say, "I've got a headache," or "I've got my hip hurts," or they want a physical something.
You got to tick something on the referral box. Yeah,
exactly. And or they also want you to say, "I want a referral for this." So then their job is just to write the referral. Not to bag GPs, but I guess it makes their job easier when you just give them clear instructions.
But it also comes back to this lack of understanding around the uniqueness of this postpartum time period, and the fact that collectively we don't know a lot about it, and enormously so. We do have to self-advocate, and this mothering space, it's such a fine line between this righteous anger towards the system that it doesn't know what we need and it doesn't give us what we need, and we end up bearing the burden for that, but also stepping into this personal responsibility of, well, what can I do with the resources that I do have access to? How can I speak up about the fact that this isn't good enough, and what do I want to do to make my own personal experience different? And I hate the fact that first part is so true. We're in a point in time where we're having to sit in that awkward balance of both the collective and the individual, and eating the elephant from both perspectives, so that hopefully when we look back on it, we go, hey, it's actually starting to disappear.
See, what's interesting too, and that's something I've spoken on a few podcast episodes actually, it's our Western culture is very isolating, right? So we, basically in our culture, we leave our parents or, our home, quite early on to be independent, to maybe find our identity, find, ourselves. So we move away from that family nest, and then we basically end up building our nest, which your parents may or may not be a part of. Again, it depends on obviously relationship, distance, all of that. But if you look at cultures like you mentioned, the Chinese culture, most I think Asian culture, and I've lived in Bali, so I can talk about the Indonesian culture. They just have this, this family, which basically in Indonesia, you live under the same roof as 3 or 4 generations, right? So you've got the kids will end up looking after their parents basically when they're too old to do certain tasks, right? And at that time, the parents are looking after their parents. So therefore, if the child has a child themselves, then you've got, you've got a myriad of people at home basically that can help to a certain extent, right? Obviously, great-grandparents can't do, they might not be able to do certain tasks, but that's where, the grandparents jump in. And so therefore there's always this help. There is always this support that's available to the new parents. And the new parents, they don't have to worry about, oh, is the house clean? Is there dinner on the table? Have I done the dishes? The laundry. It's everyone does the bit they can, but it's always the surrounding, factor is support. It's you're always supporting each other. You're always trying to make it easier in a sense for someone else. And this support that we're now lacking in our Western society is obvious in motherhood and in parenthood in general, obviously.
Hugely so. And those cultures as well, like there's still ritual and expectation and like it just happens, like the confinement nurse comes along or your sister-in-law moves in to look after you, and we've completely lost all of that ritual around. It's coming back to rite of passage, because when we break rite of passage down, some people might have heard that there's 3 specific phases in rite of passage. So we always have a surrender and a separation, and most people can recognize that, whether it's that surrender of, hey, I'm getting close to birth, I have no idea what this journey is going to be, you're on the cliff ready to fall in for whatever's coming for you, or that separation where we're nesting and we're withdrawing from day-to-day life, but we sense that it innately happens. It's biological. You can't really avoid that part. The second part of rite of passage is challenge. And however you birth your baby, that is a challenge. You are pushed to your limits. It is enormous, that birth and that early mothering experience as well. Again, it is biological. We can't short circuit that. It happens in this birth and early mothering transition. But the third part of rite of passage is honouring and celebration. And there isn't a party that comes out after the placenta. It is not biological, it is sociological, and we are completely dependent on our community coming around us, repairing that separation that happened at the start of rite of passage. We need space to tell our stories, what we learned from our birth and mothering rite of passage. We need people to be with us and around us. And we don't have those routines and those rituals and those habits and ways of being in our Western culture that means that celebration and honouring is there waiting for us. So we don't have generations of women who haven't been through rite of passage. We've got generations of women who have been through incomplete rite of passage. They are left hanging, looking for that closure, for that coming around. And when we look at what happens in postpartum support in those traditional cultures, it's usually recognised that there's 5 universal needs of people after birth. We need extended rest, and we can only achieve that when we have community around us to fill the gaps and sometimes talk some sense into ourselves, going, hey, you're not meant to be going to Kmart right now, love. Get back into bed, put your feet up, hang out with your baby. We need that extended rest, but we need community to build that. We need really good nutrition. We need people to prepare that food for us, whatever it is that resonates for us that's going to support our body to heal. We also need touch, and so that might be in the form of massage or belly binding or lots of these beautiful practices that we hear about in other cultures. But touch is all about nervous system regulation. It's recognizing that we are open and vulnerable. And guess what? We need people around us to provide that for us. Number 4 need is connection with wise women, community with wise women who have been beforehand. Maybe it is the great grandmother who physically can't do much, but she can sit there and she can hold space, and she goes, hey, I know what this feels like. It feels really awkward, and at times it feels really yuck, but I can sit here with you in this winter of postpartum. I know what you're going through. You're going to make it through. Again, we need people for that. And then the last one is connection with nature. So perhaps we don't need our community so much with that, but I think we need people to remind us of the seasonality of this postpartum. It's not that a tree is going to help us out when we've got a new baby in arms, but we can be reminded that we are going through a winter season and spring will come, and these seasons will continue to shift and change, and the heaviness of today is not going to be there forever. And again, it's so valuable to have that community around us that can remind us of those things, and that's really what is lacking. Yes, it is that support, but it's really that closure to the rite of passage, where that support and that honouring and that holding space for an extended period of time is so integral to that process.
Yeah, you've said it beautifully. And when you said that, it reminded me when I first heard of, the book, The First 40 Days, which I don't know when it was published. It would have been more than a few years
Quite
ago
an
now.
old one, isn't it? Yeah.
Now people are starting to understand what it really means, which is for you to have that extended rest, you need people, you need a community. And so therefore, they start thinking, well, how do I get this community? Who can I have in my space when the time is right to help me to, help with things that you do in your daily life. Cooking, so important. Nutrition is the base of recovery. Things like, mental load of, doing the dishes, putting the dishwasher on, doing, the laundry so you've got clean clothes, cleaning the house, anything that is important to the mom so that she feels like, she can recover because her surroundings are cared for, and she feels happy that she's in a space that's clean and there is not a pile of washing that she can see every day, and I think people are starting to understand this community, and so they're starting to get in a sense get organized early on in before pregnancy or in the pregnancy to be able to get those those extended rest, this community, this love and support during their postpartum, which we know again will set them up for success later on, even though it feels like it's only 40 days, but it's conditioning your motherhood journey in a sense.
Yes. And I hope that's another message that people are getting from this, is that so often, I think again, it's Western culture, we bring in supports when things are going bad, but we have this enormous potent window of opportunity in those first 40 days and that early postpartum, where any support that we bring in around that mother is a significant investment in not having to do more later. And so how can we not wait until it feels like our insides are falling out and we've got all this heaviness and go, oh, I need some support. What does it look like to make sure she's getting the nutrition so that she can heal that tear that happened, that she's getting the rest so all of those ligaments can shrink down to where they're meant to be? How can we get that body work to help her close up her body so that she's contained after that birth experience, and some visceral work to support the organs to go back to where they're sitting more comfortably in her body? And like, how can we actually be proactive? We're very good at siloing all our little pockets of funding and who's responsible for what, but if we invest in postpartum, we're making huge savings for later on in what we're not going to have to support that mother, that child, that family, that community through because of the lack of care she received.
That's right. And I think as a society we are reactive. We react to the problem already being there and being implanted. We don't proactively consider what we need to do so that maybe this problem actually never arises, and we go, oh, well, I mean, I didn't need a psychologist in the end, but you got one. And the fact that you talked, through, the feelings, the birth, you unloaded emotions, meant that you didn't need, for example, to, I don't know, go on medication or see a psychiatrist or you didn't get depression, and you go, well, I didn't get depression, I didn't need a psychologist, but it's, you don't know what would have happened if you didn't have that, obviously, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, what we do know is that by talking to someone like that, that's part of closing that rite of passage and honouring and celebrating. And so whatever challenges that mum encounters going forward, she's going to be doing it from a place of completed rite of passage, not this openness, messiness of I don't really know where I am in this transition, and maybe I've had another couple of babies since that first one as well. She's going to be so much grounded in herself. And that's what I see with mums that I work with, like whatever modalities we're using, they usually leave those sessions going, I have a lightness in my body, a lightness, but I actually feel like I'm anchored on the earth. I've come back down and I've got this different perspective from that experience of getting out of my head and coming back into my body that actually gives me some clarity around what would really serve me going forward. And that is such a more powerful place to be navigating any challenge that comes to us in that postpartum, that extended postpartum. Postpartum is forever. It's a very different place to be moving forward in what comes next.
That's right. Beautiful. Love everything we've spoken about. I think we are seeing a shift in the way we see postpartum, the way we see, we've heavily spoken about mums, but we're also talking about dads, because sometimes dad is the main carer, actually, even though they haven't given birth. There is still a transition, there is still a recovery. I mean, when you sleep deprived for weeks and months, there is definitely a recovery there. There's a drop in hormones in dads. We know that. So we've spoken heavily about mums, but that involves obviously parents. And I think it's good to see that things are shifting. And again, social media has some, darker sides to it, let's say, or, some things where it's like, that could be improved. But it's good at spreading awareness, information, sharing wisdom as well. I've been seeing a few accounts actually of like grandma, so it's like grandma such and such, and sharing like wisdom, and I think that's awesome. Actually, I love that. That grandparent generation going, I can use social media to spread my wisdom to people other than my grandchildren and my family. I love this. That is great.
And I think at the moment where perhaps some of the knowledge of mothers around the uniqueness of this time period and the fact that we're needing support is perhaps exceeding some of that awareness and knowledge in some health professionals out there. Like that's how a lot of people find me, is through my social media account. They see something going, that resonates with me. That's what I've been looking for, where I haven't found something that resonated beforehand. And so, how do we tune out those parts that aren't serving us, but actually use it as a really powerful medium for education and for sharing and awareness of supports that are actually available. It is a really powerful tool when we can harness those parts of social media.
And sometimes social media is your community, because you need to be able to relate to someone who is going through the same stuff or has gone through it and can say, I went through that. And I mean, that was normal. I mean, sometimes there are things we say are normal that are not, like incontinence and prolapse. But sometimes it's like, I got that too. And just knowing that you're not the only one on this planet that's going through this or has had that happen is amazing. Because you go, okay, I'm not alone. That's great.
I agree, completely agree. And that's that value of the community, isn't it? And that need for us to be holding space for mums where they can have these conversations in a way that feels really safe. And such an important part of this process.
I feel like you still need to filter through some, content pages that may not resonate with what you're looking for. And it also filters through your friends list as well, because sometimes you go, maybe we're not that aligned anymore.
Gotta love that algorithm, hey?
I feel like motherhood is a big time where you kind of realize almost the value of your friendship in a sense. And sometimes you go,
Yes.
well, maybe we don't need to be friends so much anymore because this
Mm,
friendship is not actually helping me.
yeah.
It's more
Yeah.
detrimental than helpful.
Yes.
So maybe I need to not catch up with you
Yeah.
anymore.
Well, it's part of that identity shift,
Exactly.
isn't it? A lot can
Yeah.
change around our values and the things that are actually important to us. And I love doing some of that work around, sometimes we have some clashing values and we're feeling this conflict between things that used to work
Yep.
really well for us and where we're finding ourselves landing
Mhm.
now. And there's so much of that work that we need
Yep.
to do individually as mothers and find out, where am I going to land on the other side of this enormous rite of
Yep.
passage that I've been through. And sometimes we can come out the other side quite
Yeah,
different.
and giving ourselves permission to, feel our emotions, talk about our emotions, but also
Mm,
act on, those new beliefs, value that we have, I think is also
yes.
essential because sometimes you go, old me used to say
Yes.
this or do this, believe this, but I
Yeah.
don't align with my old self. I feel this
Yes.
now, but maybe I
Yes.
shouldn't. And it's like, no, just
Yeah.
give yourself permission to be the person you want to be, even if it means that,
Yes.
well, yes, you are different, but you are growing. It's like you gave the example of the plant before. A plant is growing and
Mm,
spreads, in width, in height, and and
yeah.
then it sometimes fruits and so on. It's the same
Yeah.
for a person in general. You just
Mm,
grow and you change in your values,
yes.
beliefs, attitude
Yeah.
to things, and that's normal, and we need to give ourselves
Yes.
permission to do this and
Yeah.
feel this.
And that's where we need another language change, isn't it? Because after we've had a baby, there's so much talk about going back. Are you back
Yep.
in your jeans? Are you back at the gym? Are you back at work? Are you back catching
Yep.
up with friends? Are you back doing back?
Yep.
Like, that's the wrong direction. I'm going through. And this is what the wisdom of rite of passage gives us. It is a going
Yep.
through. Like, there's that other, like, we're going on a bear hunt. Like, when they encounter all these challenges, you can't go over it, you can't go under it, you've got to go through it. And that is the
Mm-hmm.
metamorphosis. And it's such an incredible, powerful word. But how can we be better resourcing mums
Yep.
on that transformation that we should be
Mm-hmm.
expecting of this rite of passage? Not something that we stumble on going, oh my God, I didn't realize it'd be like that. It's like, no, we should be going and expecting this
Yep.
enormous transition, and knowing that there's this full range of supports that are around us, that we can explore what it might look like to access them, that really speaks to what's coming up, what challenges are showing up for us in that transition, and what are those barriers that's keeping us from that place that we realize we're wanting to grow
Yeah,
into.
exactly. That is exactly right. We need to expect transition. We need to expect transformation, and we just need to
Yeah,
have space to do it in and
yeah,
potentially change the environment that we're doing it in
yeah.
potentially.
We need to have space to do it in, but we also need to do it from
Yeah,
within
that's right.
ourselves. I think so much of motherhood can be this real externalized experience of what I should be doing, what I
Yep.
could be doing, what everyone else is looking at. No, we've got to come home to
Hmm.
self and approach it from that place of deep knowledge, of deep wisdom that we hold hold within us, and that's a really powerful place for those seeds to grow of whatever it is that we are becoming.
Yeah, that's right. I love this so much. I love plant analogies. They're great because
they work very well.
Like if you think about it, when you plant a seed, you plant it, in a dark place, and then you nurture it. You give it sunlight. You give it water. You give it nutrients in the soil, and that's how it grows. And that's exactly what motherhood is. That is exactly what it is. I love these plants analogy because we can see a plant growing, but then when we think about motherhood, we don't think about it as, oh, I need to be nurtured, I need to be cared for, I need my environment to be safe, I need to feel supported. We don't see that. But if we put it in plant, context, it's like, oh yeah, plant is not going to grow if it's, enclosed and left in the dark and never watered.
And I think it's also a beautiful analogy that helps explain that heaviness and that winter season that we often experience in early postpartum. Like, we are planted, it can feel really dark, we're under the soil at that point, but it's only by going through that challenge, through that rite of passage, and receiving that honouring and celebration and the closing of that rite of passage. We're back to these familiar themes. It's that we grow out of the darkness, but the darkness is actually part of the design. And culturally, we're conditioned to not like sitting in those places of slowness, of inner intention. Like, we could get onto the topic of menstrual cycles. I love being curious about how someone has sat with their menstrual rhythm before they become a mother, because our bleeding time, that winter season in our cycle, that aligns with postpartum, and most of us haven't learnt how to slow down and sit with that small winter season, that darkness of the planting that we get the opportunity to engage with each month in our cycles. And so when we experience this enormous upheaval to that rhythm and this enormous winter of postpartum, it feels really foreign, and we don't really know what to do with ourselves. And so on and off to Kmart and doing all our things, and like, we're trying to push through, but postpartum kind of slaps us in the face and goes, hey, you've been pushing through for so long. It's time to be that seed. It's time to be planted, and we need people coming around us to support us to sit in that place and witness the growth that happens as well. I think witnessing is another really significant theme that comes up as we support mums as well. And what does it mean to be witnessed in our struggle, in the challenge of navigating that rite of passage, but also be witnessed to bloom and come out the other side in this self that we've transformed into.
Yeah, beautiful. That is exactly right. That is exactly what it is. And I hope that listeners get, at least one thing out of this whole conversation. But giving yourself the right to feel whatever it is you're feeling, and to be whoever you want to be, and to find what helps you, to find what would help you to grow, to do the things that you want to be able to do, which, maybe a women's health OT, or it may be to chat through emotions and to try and, find out what is not right. What am I feeling inside that makes me feel like something isn't sitting right for me?
Enormously so. And at the root of that is care.
Yes, exactly.
Isn't it? How do we bring care? Like, we talk about health care, but there's not always a lot of care in health care. But it's something that is so essential to mothers to support that transition, and so many different ways that we can bring that in for people.
Yeah, and the problem with healthcare is it implies there is something wrong with your health. But sometimes transition isn't necessarily something is wrong with your health. It could be mental health, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's the emotional health.
The fact you're in transition.
Yeah, exactly. And
sometimes it's just that you're in transition and you're feeling this in different ways, and we try to put a label on it. And sometimes that's helpful because it might give us access to funding or a care plan or something. But sometimes it's just because we're in transition, and that upheaval is valid enough for us to be seeking support and being curious about what we might need to help us on that journey that we're on.
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah, beautiful. And I think we might leave it here so you can go and pick up your children, actually, because otherwise they'll be like, where is Mum? Did she forget about us?
She's too busy talking to other people about what she does.
Exactly.
So I will share, we started off with what is occupational therapy and women's health OT, not everyone knowing that. When my son was at kinder, he had to share what your parents did for work day, and he came home and he goes, I'm so sorry, Mummy, I tried to explain it as you said, but it was just too hard, so I said you did childcare. Like, what? So I feel like that's a really lovely closure to this feel like occupational therapy has been around for so very long. We came into being after the World War, when we recognized that being able to do the everyday things that are important to us actually contribute to our health and our well-being. And we have some different perspectives on what it looks like to explore those barriers that are coming up, and how can we support people through these really significant transitions. And it's so exciting that we are a continuing growing area of practice, and that we are becoming a better known resource for mothers and for parents, as well as they go through matrescence, putrescence, and these big transitions that come along with bringing a babe into the world.
Yeah. I love your kids saying you work in childcare.
It's just too hard to explain OT, Mum. So hopefully I've given a better explanation than what he felt equipped to on the day.
That is hilarious.
But anyway,
that's so funny.
Beautiful.
The truth comes out of children's mouth. We know that.
Out of the mouths of babes. So yeah. Well, I know at the start I didn't get to share where I'm based. I live in Melbourne, and I do a lot of online work, so I see people all around Australia, but I offer face-to-face support, often with that bodywork focus in Melbourne, and I also travel to Wollongong. So long story how I've ended up there, but about 4 times a year I go up and provide face-to-face, hands-on support to mamas in that area as well. So if anyone's curious and learning a little bit more about my work, the approach that I bring to it and the modalities that I use, you can find me at www.thewildorangetree.com.au. And I'm also on social media, so Instagram and Facebook at The Wild Orange Tree. Perfect. So we'd love to connect with anyone that has questions there.
Perfect. You've said it all, I think. There you go. Well, thank you so much for coming. It's been a pleasure to have you on and to share, to chat more about this whole transition, rites of passage. Yeah, it's been so interesting. I've learned quite a bit actually as well, so there you go. And thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day.
It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. I love having these conversations. This was really good fun.
Yeah, it's been lovely. It's been really, really good. Again, this is where the conversation took us. There you go. Yeah. I'm always surprised where we
weren't sure at the start, but we've landed it beautifully, I
think we have. And I mean, it always feels too short. It always feels like, oh, we didn't talk about this and we could have spoken about that.
We go for another hour.
I mean, we've got to finish it at some point. So there you go. Thank you so much, Janelle. And
thank you so much for inviting me on. It was such good fun.
No worries. Well, no, you've done that before anyway. You've been on a podcast before, so it wasn't your first.
Yeah, I've done a few podcasts, but I love doing them. I just talking and that conversation and that co-creation of what is this new paradigm around supporting mums? What is that going to look like? I love being a part of that and sharing this unique perspective that OTs and that I bring to this space. So it's always an honour and a privilege and a joy when people invite me to speak on podcasts.
My pleasure. Well, thank you for, taking me up on the invitation. That's been really nice to have you.
Anytime.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to get notified of when a new episode comes out, please subscribe to this show on your podcast listening platform. Also, I would really appreciate it if you could leave me a review on Apple Podcast or share this episode so that other moms can find it. If you would like to tell your own pregnancy, birth, or parenting story, please head to the show notes and you will find a form there to get in touch with me. Again, thank you so much for listening, and I will be with you again next week for a new episode.